To the world, they were just my parents. To me, they were my only reason to keep breathing. But when I uncovered the truth, their love turned out to be my deepest wound. But then, I gave them a pain so familiar, even their lies couldn't escape it. To the world, they were just my parents. To me, they were everything. My father, stoic, disciplined, the kind of man who never said, "I love you," but somehow made me believe he meant it in the silence. And my mother, warm, nurturing, the woman whose hugs could silence every storm inside me. They weren't rich. They weren't famous. But to me, they were the only world I ever needed. The only love I ever knew. From scraped knees to sleepless nights, they were always there. When the kids at school called me names, it was my mother who wiped my tears and told me I was special. When I failed my math test and came home shaking, it was my father who sat with me in the dim light of our kitchen, explaining every formula with more patience than any teacher ever had. I grew up believing I was lucky. Lucky to have them and two people who loved me unconditionally. Two people who made sacrifices I never fully understood, but always felt in the silence between us. I never questioned them. Never doubted them. I would have died for them. But the truth? The truth was, they weren't who they said they were. And the love I believed in was nothing but a carefully constructed lie. I used to think every family had their secrets. Little ones, like white lies and hidden birthdays, surprise gifts, or past heartbreaks swept under the rug. But with mine, the secrets weren't small. They were monsters. I started noticing the cracks when I turned 16. It began with small things. A late-night phone call my mother pretended not to hear. The way my father's hands trembled when I asked about his childhood. Or the strange, hushed fights behind closed doors that stopped the second I entered the room. I brushed it off. Told myself all families fought. That maybe they were just stressed. I never once thought to dig deeper. Because you don't dig for darkness in the only place you've ever felt safe. But the cracks widened when I found an old photo album buried deep in the attic. Dusty. Locked. Labeled only with the words, "Do not open." And I should have listened. I should have closed the lid and walked away. But curiosity doesn't die quietly. It screams. And that night, I let it scream loud enough to ruin everything. The pictures inside weren't of me. Not of birthdays, or holidays, or school plays. They were of a baby, dark-haired, wide-eyed. But not me. There were notes attached. Documents. Old hospital records with a different name than mine. Dates that didn't add up. A different city. A different birth date. And then, a torn letter. Signed by a woman I'd never heard of. "My sweet baby, I'm sorry I let them take you." My hands shook. I couldn't breathe. And when I went to my parents to ask, the silence that followed, it was deafening. I sat across from them at the dinner table that night, my fingers gripping the edges of the photo album like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. The same table we'd shared laughs over for years. The same seats, the same routine, except this time, I wasn't their daughter anymore. At least, not in the way I thought I was. They looked at the album in silence. My mother's lips trembled, eyes darting to my father as if silently begging him to take control. He didn't. He just stared at me, stone-faced, hollow. "Say something," I whispered, my voice cracked like broken glass. "Please, just tell me what this is." My father exhaled deeply, then stood up. He didn't come closer. He didn't even flinch. "It doesn't matter anymore," he said. "You're our daughter now. That's what counts." Now. That one word sliced through me. Now. What was I before? My mother reached out with trembling hands. "We were going to tell you one day. We were just trying to protect you." "From what?" I snapped. "From who? Who is this woman?" I slammed the letter on the table. "Is she my real mother?" The word "real" made her flinch. She looked like she wanted to speak, But my father cut her off with a cold glance. "We gave you a life," he said. "A good one. That's more than she ever could. She didn't want you." I stared at him in disbelief. "You don't get to rewrite history just because you gave me a bed and packed me lunches," I hissed. "Tell me the truth." He walked away. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't follow him. Instead, she crumpled like paper, holding her face in her hands as sobs escaped her lips. I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to say no to him. Those words haunted me, because that's when I understood. It was my father. He was the one who took me. My mother. She went along with it. Maybe out of love. Maybe out of fear. Maybe because lies are easier than guilt. They hadn't adopted me. They had stolen me. I wasn't lost to another family. I had been taken. Suddenly, every memory I had felt like a performance. Every hug. Every lullaby. Every moment I thought was unconditional love. It was just part of the act. I went to my room that night, closed the door, and screamed into my pillow until my throat bled. Grief wasn't supposed to feel like this. Grief was for the dead. But my world had died. Quietly. Cruelly. And now, I had no idea who I was. No name. No past. Just a girl caught in the space between two lives, one built on lies, and one I had never known. I wanted to run, to pack a bag and disappear. But where would I go? I didn't even know her name. The woman who had written me that letter. The woman who had called me her baby. But I was going to find out. I had to. Because no matter how much they tried to bury the truth, I was going to dig up every piece of it. And once I did, they would regret the day they ever called me theirs. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw shadows of a life that wasn't mine, but should have been. A woman's voice I had never heard calling me baby. A lullaby I couldn't remember, but somehow felt deep in my bones. By morning, my decision was clear. I was going to find her. The letter was my only lead. It was torn, incomplete, but it had a name, Raina, and a town I had never heard of. Small, rural, faded ink on faded paper, Hollow Creek. It wasn't even on most maps, but it existed. I skipped school. Stole money from the emergency drawer in the kitchen, ironic, really, considering the emergency was them. And I boarded a train going nowhere and everywhere at once. Every mile that passed, I shed pieces of the girl they raised. The obedient daughter. The quiet student. The girl who called strangers mom and dad without knowing any better. By the time I stepped into Hollow Creek, I was known. And I was finally free. The town was small, just like the letter said. One gas station. One diner. One main road lined with houses that looked like they'd been built 100 years ago and hadn't changed since. I started at the diner. I walked in, letter in hand, heart in throat. The woman behind the counter looked up. Gray hair in a bun. Eyes sharp with decades of untold stories. I asked, "Do you know anyone named Raina?" "Raina Bell?" She froze. Then slowly, she nodded. "She used to live up by the lake. Haven't seen her in years," she said. "Some say she went mad after her baby disappeared. Others say she left town to forget." I felt my knees weaken. "She had a baby?" I whispered. The woman looked at me closely. Then, like a ghost had just walked in, her expression changed. "You ain't from around here, are you?" I shook my head. "She your mother?" "I think so." She gave me directions. Up a hill, past the overgrown bridge, near the abandoned cabin by the lake. I walked for hours, not even feeling the cold or the rocks cutting into my soles. All I could hear was my heartbeat. All I could feel was the weight of 20 years pressing down on me. And then I saw her. She was standing outside the cabin, thin, worn down, skin kissed by too many winters and too many griefs. She was hanging laundry, her hands trembling. I didn't know what to say. What do you say to the woman who gave you life and then lost you? I stepped forward. Raina? I said, my voice barely louder than the wind. She turned. Her eyes met mine, and I swear, the world stopped turning. She dropped the sheet she was holding, covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes faster than words could form. She whispered, "No, it can't be." But it was. And somehow, she knew it. I showed her the letter. The one she wrote when she was younger, when she thought she'd never see me again. She reached out and touched my face, trembling. "You have my mother's eyes," she said. I never forgot. Not 1 second. I wanted to fall into her arms and cry. But I didn't. Not yet. There were questions. So many. And answers I wasn't ready to hear, but needed all the same. We went inside. The cabin was small, but warm. She made tea with shaky hands, then sat down and told me everything. "I was 19 when I had you," she began. "Your father left before you were born. My family disowned me. I had no one but you." She paused, trying to collect herself. "But one day, when you were only a few months old, someone broke into our home, took you. They left no note, no warning, just emptiness." She wiped her eyes, struggling to breathe through the pain. "I searched for years, filed reports, begged the police. I even went to the city where you were last seen, but nothing. It was like you vanished off the face of the earth." I listened, silent tears falling. She didn't know who had taken me, but I did. And that truth made my stomach turn. "They told me she didn't want me," I whispered, bitterness still lingering. Her head snapped up. "Who?" "My. The people who raised me." Raina looked at me like the world had just ended again. "They lied." I nodded. "I know." That night, I didn't sleep again. But this time it wasn't out of fear. It was out of purpose. Because the people who stole me had no idea that their biggest mistake wasn't taking me. It was letting me live long enough to find out. And now that I had, I was going to make sure they never forgot. Not for a single moment of the rest of their lives. I stayed with Raina for 3 days. 3 days of tears, long silences, and stories that shattered everything I thought I knew. She showed me photos of her holding me in the hospital, of my nursery, of a younger version of herself glowing with hope. She told me about the life I should have had, the love I was meant to grow up in. And every second I spent with her made me feel more whole and more furious. Because while she cried herself to sleep night after night wondering if I was alive, they, the ones who took me, built to life on her pain. They celebrated birthdays. They took vacations. They smiled in family photos like they hadn't committed a quiet, unspeakable crime. I couldn't go back. Not like before. But I would go back. Not as their daughter. Not as their puppet. But as the storm they never saw coming. Before I left Hollow Creek, Raina gave me one last thing, the name of a detective she had worked with all those years ago, Detective Hartley. He was retired now, but when I called and told him who I was, he drove 5 hours just to meet me. He looked at me like I was a ghost from a cold case file that had never closed in his heart. "I spent years chasing dead ends," he told me, staring down at the photo I gave him of me and the people who stole me. "But I always had a feeling it was someone close. Someone who knew how to disappear without raising suspicion." He promised to help. He still had the original case file. And with my testimony, my DNA, my presence, he said we could finally open it again. I didn't care about courts. Not really. I cared about truth. I cared about letting them feel what Raina had felt. What I had felt. I didn't just want justice. I wanted them to break. Like they broke me. When I returned to the house I once called home, I didn't ring the doorbell. I walked in. They were in the living room, watching TV, laughing. Like they hadn't ruined 2 lives and buried the evidence under family dinners and photo frames. My mother, no, the woman who raised me, jumped to her feet. "Where have you been?" "We've been worried sick." I threw the album on the floor in front of her, then tossed the letter, the documents, the hospital records, and finally, the photo of me in Raina's arms, seconds after birth. "I found her," I said coldly. "And I found me." Her face paled. My so-called father stood slowly, cautious, calculating. "You don't understand." "No," I interrupted. "You don't understand. You took me from her. You stole me, lied to me, built a life on my pain, on her pain." My mother broke down crying, but I didn't flinch. "You said she didn't want me," I continued, my voice sharp as a blade. "You said you were protecting me. But the only thing you were protecting was your own secret." She whispered, "We loved you. You don't kidnap someone and call it love." Then I stepped closer to the man who had claimed to be my father. "You made me believe I was your blood. You let me look in the mirror every day thinking something was wrong with me because I didn't see you in my face. Because I never felt like I belonged." His jaw clenched. I kept going. "You raised me in a lie. And now, I'm going to make sure that lie burns everything you ever tried to protect." That night, I contacted Detective Hartley again. We filed everything. DNA, documents, old letters. And within 48 hours, there was a warrant. I didn't hide it from them. In fact, I made sure they knew it was coming. I wanted them to feel the weight of it. The dread, the panic, the unraveling of everything they'd built. And when the officers knocked on the door and dragged my father out in handcuffs, when my mother sobbed and screamed my name, begging me to stop, I didn't blink. Because for the first time in my life, I was the one in control. They tore apart two souls. Now I was going to haunt them with the ghost of who I had been, and the fire of who I had become. But justice wasn't enough. They needed to feel it in their bones. To know the weight of every stolen lullaby, every fake memory, every breath they robbed from the woman who brought me into this world. And I had one more move left. A move they would never recover from. Because the worst part of pain isn't the scream. It's the silence that follows it. And that silence was coming for them. The courtroom was colder than I imagined. Not in temperature, but in the way eyes followed me. Pity, confusion, curiosity. Like I was the broken puzzle piece no one could quite place. I sat beside Raina. Her hands were trembling, but she didn't let go of mine. Not once. The woman who once lost her baby was now standing tall, ready to face the monsters who stole 20 years of her life. And I was right beside her, not as a child looking for a home anymore, but as a force that would rewrite everything. My former parents entered in silence. The woman who raised me wouldn't meet my eyes. The man who used to lecture me about honesty stared at the floor like it owed him forgiveness. When the charges were read, kidnapping, forgery, obstruction of justice, there was a hush. But in my heart, there was a roar. They pleaded not guilty. Of course they did. They claimed they rescued me, that Raina was unfit, that I would have been in danger. But no documents backed that up. No police reports. No custody orders. Just lies. So many carefully layered lies that had finally begun to bleed through. The prosecution played a recording I'd made. From the night I confronted them. Their voices, desperate and tangled in excuses. "I couldn't have children," she had said. "She didn't deserve you. You weren't supposed to find out," he added, like I was a mistake they were trying to clean up. The room fell silent when it ended. And then, I stood. Not to testify, but to speak my truth. I spent my entire life thinking love meant being confused and grateful at the same time. I said, my voice calm but sharp. They told me my mother didn't want me. That I was abandoned. Unwanted. A mistake. I looked at the jury, then directly at the woman who raised me. But I wasn't unwanted. I was stolen. Taken from a mother who loved me so much, she never stopped looking. I turned to my father, the man who raised me with lies dressed as lullabies. You taught me how to lie by watching you, how to wear masks, how to survive. But now, I don't need to survive anymore. I'm here to live. And living means finally breaking the chains you wrapped around me since I was a baby. I sat back down. And I didn't cry. Not once. Because my tears were no longer theirs to hold. The trial lasted weeks. But the verdict only took hours. Guilty. On all counts. The woman who claimed to love me broke down in court, screaming that I had betrayed her. But how do you betray a lie? The man who claimed he was protecting me, he didn't even flinch. He just stared at me like a painting he couldn't understand. But none of it mattered. Because as the gavel slammed down, I felt 20 years of silence crumble. And in its place, a voice. Mine. They were sentenced. Years behind bars. Not enough to fix what they broke, but enough to make them sit in the very darkness they once left Reina in. And for me, that was a start. But my revenge wasn't about watching them rot. It was about reclaiming every single part of me they tried to erase. And I wasn't done yet. I changed my name. Legally. Back to what it should have always been, Omar Bell. I moved in with Reina, and for the first time, I knew what peace sounded like. It sounded like her humming in the kitchen. It sounded like real laughter. It sounded like home. But sometimes, late at night, I'd walk past their empty house. The one they built on lies. Still. Cold. Quiet. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. Because the silence they left behind was already louder than any revenge I could scream. They say time heals all wounds. But for them, time would be the wound that never closed. And every second would be a reminder that I wasn't their daughter. I was their undoing. Months passed. Each day felt like a small breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. I was learning who I was, not who they told me to be. I was no longer just someone's stolen child. I was Amara, Reina's daughter. And no lie could take that away from me now. Reina and I created a life in small moments. Cooking together. Sharing music. Even fighting sometimes, like all real mothers and daughters do. But even our fights healed me. Because for once, I knew they came from love, not manipulation. Still, the scars lingered. Not the visible kind, but the ones that whispered late at night. What if they had never been caught? What if you had never found the letter? What if you'd never been found at all? Some nights I'd wake up in a cold sweat, wondering how much of my life was mine and how much had been engineered by someone else's selfishness. That's when I started writing. Everything. The whole truth. The lies. The silence. The moment I opened that letter, to the moment I watched them get sentenced. I poured it all into pages soaked in memory and rage. Not because I wanted sympathy, but because the world needed to know. Kidnapping doesn't always happen in back alleys. Sometimes, it wears a gentle smile and tucks you in at night. I titled the manuscript, Stolen Twice, first from my mother, then from myself. A small publishing house picked it up within weeks. They were stunned that the story was real. And soon, so was the world. Interviews, podcasts, television specials. Everywhere I looked, there was my name, my face, my truth. People reached out, others like me, or like Reina, who had lost children to people they trusted. I became a voice for them, a mirror for the wounds no one else saw. But there was one letter that stood out from the rest. It was handwritten. Neat, careful, cold. From her, the woman who raised me. I read your book. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in silence and listened to the story you believe is yours. But I still believe I gave you a better life. I'd do it all again. Love, Mom. Mom. The word twisted like a knife. But I didn't rip the letter up. I framed it, hung it beside the book on my shelf. Because that letter, wasn't power. It was proof. Proof that even in their cage of consequences, they still refused to admit guilt. But I didn't need their apology, or their remorse, or their love. I already had something stronger. The silence they now lived in. And it was only getting louder. 1 year after the verdict, I visited them. Not out of pity. Not for answers. But for closure. It was a cold, gray morning when I walked into the correctional facility. I was allowed to see both of them at once, under supervision. They walked into the room together, still wearing the faces of the people who once tucked me in. But I didn't feel warmth. I felt ice. "Why are you here?" the woman asked, her voice barely a whisper. I smiled. "To say goodbye." She blinked. "Goodbye?" "Yes. To the version of me you created. The girl who believed in bedtime stories and birthday cakes. The girl who thought your love was real." I turned to the man who had taught me how to lie by simply existing. "You taught me how to survive by deception. Now I thrive by truth. I thought revenge would be fire and fury. But it's quieter than that. It's the echo of your names forgotten. The world knows what you did. And now, they know who I am." I stood slowly. "You built a house of lies and called it home. I walked out of it and built an empire with the ashes." As I turned to leave, the woman stood up abruptly. "I loved you," she said. I paused. Then looked back. Just once. "You loved owning me. That's not the same thing." And I left. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I stood in front of a mirror and saw myself clearly. For the first time in my life. Not their daughter. Not their victim. Just me. And the silence I left behind? It was no longer mine to carry. It belonged to them. Forever. It had been 2 years since the trial. 2 years since the world learned my name. My real name. And 2 years since I let go of the girl they built from lies. Now, I lived on my own terms. The book became a symbol, not of tragedy, but of reclaiming power. It touched lives I never expected. Survivors, parents, children still waiting for justice. I spoke at conferences. I sat on panels. I worked with legal groups to help families reunite with stolen children. But in the quiet corners of my soul, the wounds still whispered. Even healing, I learned, comes with echoes. Until one day, a call changed everything again. It was from the prison. But not the one they were in. The hospital ward. The woman who raised me, falsely, selfishly, was dying. She wanted to see me. One last time. Raina said I didn't owe her anything. But something inside me needed to go. Not to grant forgiveness, but to close the last door she ever dared leave open. So I went. She was frail. Smaller than I remembered. Her hair was thinned out. Her skin, pale. But her eyes, still sharp, still calculating. "You came," she whispered. "I didn't come for you," I said calmly. "I came for me." She chuckled, weak, bitter. "You always were mine, no matter what the world says." I sat in the chair across from her. No emotion. "I was never yours. You borrowed me. Stole me. Like something you thought you deserved." "You don't understand," she murmured. "I loved you. I made you better than she ever could." I leaned forward, my voice ice cold. "You made me a prisoner. You dressed my cage with birthday cakes and bedtime stories." But it was still a cage. Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm dying." I stood slowly. "Then you have something in common with the version of me you created." "She's dead too." I turned to leave. But she said one last thing. "She didn't even look for you for the first 5 years. Ask her that. Ask your real mother why she waited so long." I paused. Just for a second. But I didn't turn back. Because I knew exactly why she said it. Not to reveal truth, but to plant doubt. Even on her deathbed, she was still trying to control the story. But the thing was, I held the pen now. Later that night, I did ask Reina. Not because I doubted her, but because I wanted the full truth. She looked down, hands trembling slightly. I was in a coma for 2 years, Amara, she said softly. They found me in the woods, nearly dead. I had no ID, no memory. They thought I was a drifter. It took time before I even remembered your name. My chest tightened. She looked up at me, eyes filled with tears. And when I did, no one believed me. I wasn't your legal guardian anymore. The system buried me. She reached out and held my hand. I never stopped looking for you. Not even when I didn't know who I was. I broke down then. Not because I was sad, but because I finally understood. She didn't lose me. The world tried to erase us. But love remembered. A month later, the woman who kidnapped me died. Alone. Forgotten. Her obituary was a 2-line note in a paper no one read. And me? I kept living. I launched a foundation. Ashes to Flame, a nonprofit dedicated to reuniting abducted children with their real families. We worked with trauma therapists, private investigators, and lawyers. And every child we found was another piece of peace stitched back into this broken world. I started writing again. But this time, fiction. Stories of brave girls who face monsters with soft voices. Stories where the villain never wins. But there was one manuscript I never showed anyone. I wrote it only for me. It was titled, The Silence You Left Behind. And the last line read, You thought you had taken everything from me. But I was never the light you could dim. I was the fire. And now you live in the smoke. People ask me sometimes, do you regret it? Telling the truth? Losing the only parents you knew? And I always say, I didn't lose them. I uncovered who they were. And found the mother who never stopped loving me beneath the rubble. Because in the end, revenge wasn't fire and fury. It was truth. It was freedom. It was every step I took forward while they stayed frozen in the past. They said I was theirs. They lied. I was never theirs to break. I was always mine. And that was the part they could never control.